I was working late again. The studio had become my sanctuary, a place where I could drown out the noise of everything else. My doubts, my frustrations, the increasing distance between me and Rachel. The smell of paint mixed with the faint scent of turpentine in the air as I stood in front of a half-finished canvas, the brush hovering in my hand, waiting for the inspiration to hit. But tonight, like so many other nights, it didn't come. Instead, my thoughts kept drifting back to her. It wasn't always like this. Rachel used to be the one pushing me to keep going, to believe in myself when I didn't. She was there from the beginning, when my work barely sold at local exhibits, when I was scraping by, working odd jobs to fund my passion. She understood the grind because she was a part of it, working as a curator at a small gallery, curating shows for other artists while quietly building me up from the inside. But something had shifted. Over the last year, as my career started taking off, she had started to pull away. Maybe it was me. Maybe I had gotten so wrapped up in my own success that I hadn't noticed her slipping away. I set down the brush, my hand shaking slightly as I walked over to the large windows that overlooked the city below. It was late, but not too late for the soft glow of car headlights to snake through the streets like distant stars. Rachel wasn't home tonight. She had gone out, claiming she was meeting some old friends for drinks. I wanted to believe her. I always wanted to believe her. A sudden vibration from my phone on the work table snapped me out of my thoughts. I glanced at it, expecting a message from her, but it was just a notification about an upcoming show, another one funded by my mysterious benefactor. I had never met him in person, but his presence was everywhere in my life. David Harlow, a name I'd only heard through my agent, had been quietly backing my work for months now, commissioning pieces, setting up gallery exhibits, and generally ensuring that I had the means to focus solely on my art. It was surreal at first, like a dream come true, but dreams can twist into nightmares when you least expect it. As I stared at the notification, something gnawed at the back of my mind. I hated that I felt this way, but the truth was, I had begun to suspect Rachel was cheating on me. I couldn't explain why. There was no hard evidence, just a gut feeling, a series of small, disconnected moments that felt wrong. The way she would linger on her phone when she thought I wasn't watching, the nights she came home later than usual, the distant look in her eyes when we were together. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who reads too much into things. But then, there was the phone call. It happened a few nights ago, when I had left my phone in the kitchen by accident and overheard her talking on hers. I had walked in, expecting to catch a snippet of a conversation with one of her friends, but instead, I heard her voice drop to a whisper, her tone soft and unfamiliar. "I'll see you tomorrow," she had said, her voice low and intimate. My stomach had twisted into knots. She had quickly hung up when she saw me standing there, her face flushing with an awkward smile, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Who was that?" I had asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Oh, just Charlotte, from work," she had replied too quickly, too casually. I hadn't pushed it then, but it had planted a seed of doubt that had grown over the past few days into something I couldn't ignore. Tonight, as I stood in the silence of the studio, that doubt felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I picked up my phone again, scrolling aimlessly through the texts between us, trying to find some sign, some hint of what was really going on. But everything looked normal, if not distant. Our conversations had grown shorter, more transactional. "Don't forget to pick up milk. Did you pay the rent? I'll be home late tonight." Just the usual back and forth of two people living together, but not really living together. I locked the phone and shoved it into my pocket. I couldn't take this anymore. I needed to know the truth. I walked over to the table where her laptop sat open. She had left it here before going out, probably expecting that I wouldn't snoop. I shouldn't snoop. That's what I kept telling myself as I sat down and opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. But the need to know was stronger than my guilt. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, in her messages, was the proof I had been dreading. A string of texts between her and someone listed simply as D. At first, the messages were vague, nothing incriminating, but as I scrolled further back, my stomach clenched with each new line. They had been meeting for months. The language grew more intimate, more revealing. I can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Liam's working late again, so I'm free. My hands trembled as I read those words. It felt like I had been punched in the gut, the wind knocked out of me. This was it. This was the confirmation of everything I had feared. Rachel was cheating on me, and not just with anyone, with David Harlow. I could barely process it. David Harlow, the man who had been quietly funding my career, the man who had helped make me who I was also the man who was stealing my wife. How long had this been going on? Had he known who I was when he started buying my art? Had he been toying with me this whole time, pulling the strings from behind the scenes while seducing Rachel? I felt sick. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, felt like a lie. My art, my success, my marriage, it was all wrapped up in this twisted web of betrayal and manipulation. I stood up from the table, my legs shaky beneath me as the reality of it all sank in. I needed to confront her. I needed to confront David. But I didn't know where to start. Part of me wanted to storm out, track her down, and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had always been careful, calculating, knew that I needed to be smart about this. If I confronted her without a plan, I could lose everything. Not just my marriage, but my career as well. I walked back to the canvas, staring at the half-finished painting with a sense of detachment. What did it even matter anymore? Every brushstroke, every color choice felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that my success had been bought with betrayal. I thought back to the early days, before David, before all the shows and commissions, back when it was just me and Rachel, struggling to make ends meet, but full of hope. She had believed in me then, or at least I had thought she did. Now, I didn't know what to believe. I heard the door to the studio creak open behind me, and I turned around, my heart racing. Rachel stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. "Liam, I didn't expect you to still be here," she said, her voice a little too casual, as if she was trying to gauge my mood. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "We need to talk." Rachel's eyes darted toward mine, and I could see the brief flicker of fear in them before she composed herself. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice strained but still trying to maintain that casual tone. My stomach churned as I stood there, trying to figure out how to confront her without losing my mind in the process. I clenched my fists, feeling the familiar rage bubbling just under the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was all I could manage without screaming. Rachel's expression didn't change at first, but her body went rigid. She knew what I was talking about. There was no way she didn't. "Know what?" she asked, still trying to play dumb, but her voice betrayed her. It wavered just slightly, enough to make me want to punch something. "I know about David," I spat, the words finally coming out like venom. "I know about the affair." Rachel's face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but instead, she just let out a shaky breath and sat down in the chair by the door. "Liam, it's not what you think," she started, but I cut her off. Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "I saw the messages, Rachel. I saw everything. Months. You've been lying to me for months." The betrayal felt like it was crushing me from the inside out. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? She put her face in her hands, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But when she looked back up at me, her expression was more defeated than remorseful. "I'm sorry, Liam. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Then how the hell was it supposed to happen?" I demanded, pacing the room now, my hands running through my hair as if I could somehow make sense of the chaos inside my head. "You've been sleeping with him while he's been funding my career. Our life. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" Rachel flinched at my words, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at the floor, as if it held the answers to all of our problems. "I didn't plan it," she said finally, her voice small. "It just happened." "It just happened," I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "You don't just happen to have an affair, Rachel. You don't just happen to betray your husband." I felt like I was spiraling, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of everything. How long had she been seeing him? How many times had I come home late from the studio, thinking she was just out with friends or working late herself, while she was actually with him? She shook her head, tears finally spilling from her eyes. It wasn't like that, Liam. I didn't mean to hurt you. I stopped pacing and turned to face her, my hands trembling. Then why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why him? Why David? Rachel wiped at her tears, her shoulders shaking. Because he was there, she whispered. Because he understood things about me that you didn't. I froze, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. You've been so focused on your art, on your career, that you stopped seeing me, Liam. You stopped seeing us. I supported you for years. Years. And when things finally started happening for you, I thought maybe we could get back to what we used to be. But you just kept pulling away. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. So instead of talking to me, you decided to sleep with the man funding my career? The man who's been controlling everything behind the scenes? Rachel winced, as if the words were physically hurting her, but she didn't deny it. I didn't plan it, she said again. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I could barely look at her. My head was spinning, my chest tight with a rage and hurt I didn't know how to contain. So, what now? I asked, my voice hoarse. Do you want to be with him? Are you leaving me for David? She didn't answer right away, and that silence spoke volumes. My stomach dropped as I waited for her to say something, anything that might make this situation bearable. But all she did was shake her head, her eyes avoiding mine. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I want anymore. That was it. The last thread holding me together snapped, and I turned away from her, my body trembling with the effort of holding back my anger. I can't do this, I muttered under my breath. Liam, wait, she said, standing up from the chair, but I didn't stop. I grabbed my coat, threw it over my shoulders, and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. I needed to get out of there before I did something I'd regret. I slammed the door behind me, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. My mind was racing, and all I could think about was getting as far away from Rachel as possible. I couldn't believe this was happening. Everything was unraveling. My marriage, my career, it was all tied together in this sick, twisted knot of betrayal, and I had no idea how to untangle it. I walked for what felt like hours, my feet carrying me aimlessly through the city streets. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to move, to think, to process everything that had just come crashing down around me. Eventually, I found myself at a small bar tucked away on a quiet corner. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went to, but tonight, I didn't care. I pushed open the door and walked in, the dim lighting and soft murmur of conversation doing little to soothe the chaos in my head. I found a seat at the bar and ordered a drink, hoping the alcohol would numb the pain, if only for a little while. As I sat there, nursing my drink, I couldn't stop thinking about David Harlow. He had been this faceless benefactor for so long, a name I knew but had never really thought much about. But now, he was real. Now he was the man who had not only funded my art career, but had also stolen my wife. The betrayal stung in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just Rachel, it was everything. My entire career, my success, had been tainted by this man. I downed my drink and ordered another. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just sit back and watch everything fall apart without fighting for what was mine. As the alcohol began to settle in, dulling the sharp edges of my thoughts, a plan started to form in my mind. I was going to confront David. I was going to look him in the eye and demand answers. I needed to know why he had done this, why he had come into my life and taken everything from me. The thought of confronting him filled me with a sense of purpose, a direction that I had been missing since I found out about the affair. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to achieve. Maybe I just wanted to see the look on his face when he realized that I knew. Maybe I wanted to make him feel the way I was feeling right now, betrayed, humiliated, and powerless. I finished my drink and stood up, my legs feeling a little unsteady beneath me. The bar had filled up while I'd been sitting there, and I had to push my way through the crowd to get to the door. Once I was outside, the cool air hit me again, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for David Harlow. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the call button, but then I pressed it. The phone rang twice before he answered. Liam, his voice came through the line, smooth and familiar. To what do I owe the pleasure? My jaw tightened at the sound of his voice. I forced myself to stay calm, even though my blood was boiling. We need to talk, I said. My voice clipped. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Is everything all right? He asked, sounding genuinely concerned. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Meet me at the gallery tomorrow, I said, ignoring his question. We'll talk then. Before he could respond, I hung up the phone and shoved it back into my pocket. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew there was no turning back now. Tomorrow, I was going to confront David Harlow, and I was going to get the answers I deserved. The next morning felt like I was dragging my feet through quicksand. Every movement took effort. Every thought had weight. I barely slept after hanging up the phone with David the night before. My mind had been consumed with what I was going to say to him, how I was going to confront him without completely losing my temper. It felt impossible to prepare for a conversation that could change everything. What was I hoping to accomplish? Did I want an apology? A confession? I didn't even know anymore. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked like hell, dark circles under my eyes, my hair a mess, and the tension in my jaw refusing to ease. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the fog that seemed to cling to me. Today was the day. I was going to see him face to face and demand answers. Rachel had left early, avoiding me again. She hadn't said much after our argument the night before, and the silence between us had stretched into something unbearable. Part of me wanted to confront her again, to demand that she choose between me and David right then and there. But I knew that wasn't going to get me anywhere. Not yet. The gallery was quiet when I arrived. It always had this stillness in the mornings, before the patrons trickled in, before the events and exhibitions brought life to the place. I'd spent countless hours here, both as a struggling artist trying to make connections, and later, once my career had begun to take off, preparing for my own shows. But today felt different. Everything felt off, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. I walked through the familiar space, the high ceilings and stark white walls, making me feel small. My heart raced with every step, and my palms were sweaty despite the cool air. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing good would come from it. David was already there when I arrived, standing in front of one of my paintings, a large, abstract piece that had been one of my first major sales. He looked as calm and composed as ever, his back turned to me as he studied the work with that same thoughtful expression he always had. It made my skin crawl. "Liam," he said without turning around, as if he'd sensed me approaching. "This one's always been one of my favorites." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced myself to respond. "We need to talk." David finally turned to face me, a small, unreadable smile on his lips. "I figured as much," he said, his voice smooth and practiced, like he had been rehearsing for this conversation too. "Why don't we sit?" I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to pretend that this was some casual chat between friends. But I forced myself to walk over to the small seating area at the side of the gallery, my muscles tensing with every step. David followed, taking a seat across from me, his movements graceful and deliberate. There was a long silence as we both sat there, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. I stared at him, trying to figure out where to start. How do you accuse someone of betraying you in the worst possible way without sounding like a lunatic? "I know about you and Rachel," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "I know about the affair." David didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. If anything, his expression softened slightly, like he had expected this, like he had been waiting for it. "I see," he said calmly, leaning back in his chair. "And what exactly do you want to talk about?" I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to punch him right then and there. How could he be so calm, so collected? "I want to know why," I snapped, my voice rising. "Why her? Why me? You've been funding my career, helping me succeed, and all the while you've been sleeping with my wife. Why?" David sighed, looking down at his hands for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "Liam, I won't insult you by pretending that what happened between Rachel and me was anything other than a mistake. But I never intended to hurt you. That was never my goal." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Right. So what was your goal? To destroy my life without me knowing? No, David said, his voice steady. I admired you, Liam. I still do. Your talent, your vision, it's rare. That's why I wanted to support you, to help you reach the potential I saw in you from the beginning. By sleeping with my wife, I shot back, my voice laced with venom. David winced slightly, but didn't back down. I didn't plan for it to happen. But Rachel, she was lonely. She felt neglected. And as much as it pains me to say it, she came to me for comfort. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew that Rachel and I had been distant, but hearing it from David's mouth made it feel so much worse. You think that makes it okay? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. You think that justifies what you did? No, David said softly. Nothing justifies it. But I think you need to understand that Rachel's feelings, her needs, were being ignored, and that's not just on me. That's on you too, Liam. I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. Don't you dare try to put this on me. David remained seated, his calm demeanor infuriating me even more. I'm not blaming you, he said evenly, but I think you need to take a hard look at your marriage, at how things got to this point. I clenched my fists at my sides, my vision blurring with rage. So what? This is my fault? You think I pushed her into your arms? No, he said, finally standing up to face me. But I think you need to realize that your relationship with Rachel has been strained for a long time. She's been supporting you emotionally, financially, and when you finally started to succeed, you didn't turn back to her. You kept moving forward, leaving her behind. The words stung, but I refused to let them sink in. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know more than you think, David said quietly, and I know that Rachel didn't want to hurt you. She still loves you, Liam. I laughed bitterly. She has a funny way of showing it. David sighed again, running a hand through his hair. I know this is hard to hear. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I do think you need to decide what you want. Do you want to save your marriage, or are you willing to let it fall apart? I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Save my marriage? How could I even think about that after everything that had happened, after everything he had done? I don't know, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if it's worth saving. David nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. That's something only you can decide. I stood there, my mind racing, my heart aching with confusion and anger. I had come here for answers, but now that I had them, I didn't know what to do with them. Part of me wanted to walk away from all of it, my marriage, my career, everything that was tied to David and Rachel. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to get where I was, couldn't let go that easily. I need time, I muttered, more to myself than to David. Take the time you need, David said gently. But remember, this isn't just about your career, it's about your life, your future. Don't make any decisions out of anger. I glared at him, hating how reasonable he sounded, how calm he remained through all of this. You should have thought about that before you decided to ruin everything. David didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me with that same unreadable expression, as if he knew something I didn't, as if he already knew how this was going to end. I turned on my heel and walked out of the gallery, my chest tight with rage and hurt. The conversation had left me feeling even more confused than before. I had come for closure, for answers, but all I had gotten were more questions. How could I ever trust Rachel again? How could I continue to work with David, knowing what he had done? And worst of all, how could I face the fact that maybe, just maybe, some of what he had said was true? The streets outside felt cold and unwelcoming as I walked, my thoughts a tangled mess. I had no idea what my next move would be, no idea how to move forward from here. All I knew was that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. As I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be Rachel or David, but it wasn't. It was a notification from the gallery, an invitation to a party celebrating my upcoming exhibition, an exhibition David had arranged. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind spinning. An exhibition party, a celebration of my success, funded by the man who had torn my life apart. Could I really go through with it? Could I stand there, smiling, pretending that everything was fine while my entire world crumbled beneath me? I stared at the invitation on my phone for what felt like hours. The words seemed to blur together, as if my mind was refusing to process them. A party, a celebration of everything I had achieved. Or at least, everything I thought I had achieved. But now, after everything that had come to light, I wasn't sure if any of it was real anymore. How much of my success was mine? How much of it was just David pulling the strings behind the scenes, manipulating the course of my career while sleeping with my wife? I wanted to throw my phone across the room, to smash it against the wall and watch it shatter into pieces, just like my life had. But I didn't. Instead, I shoved it back into my pocket and sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The room was quiet, too quiet. The silence seemed to press in on me, amplifying the chaos inside my head. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. Rachel hadn't come home yet, and honestly, I didn't know if I wanted her to. The thought of facing her again, of having to talk about what had happened, made my stomach turn. I didn't know what I was supposed to say to her. I didn't know what I wanted from her. Did I want her to beg for forgiveness? To explain herself? Or did I just want to walk away from all of it and never look back? The anger I'd felt the night before, the raw, burning rage that had driven me to confront David, had dulled into something colder now. Something more dangerous. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was lost, and I didn't know how to find my way back. The minutes ticked by, and eventually I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. I looked at my reflection, the same way I had that morning, but this time it felt different. I felt different. The man staring back at me looked hollow, like he was just a shell of who he used to be. And maybe that was true. Maybe, in some twisted way, David and Rachel had taken everything that mattered from me, my art, my marriage, my sense of self, and left me with nothing but this empty, aching void. The gallery party was only a few days away. I had to make a decision. Would I go? Could I go? Could I stand in front of a room full of people, pretending to celebrate a success that I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore? The thought of facing David again, of seeing Rachel there with him, made my blood boil. But at the same time, a part of me wanted to go. I wanted to prove that I could rise above all of this, that I could take back control of my life, my art, everything that had been stolen from me. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Maybe I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let David and Rachel take away everything I'd worked for. If I had to stand in that gallery and smile through gritted teeth, I would. If I had to pretend that everything was fine, I would. Because at the end of the day, my art was mine. No one could take that from me. The days leading up to the party passed in a blur. Rachel and I barely spoke. She was distant, withdrawn, like she was waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't. I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about was her and David together, and it made me sick. So I threw myself into my work, pouring everything I had left into the last-minute preparations for the exhibition. It was the only thing that made sense anymore, the only thing that gave me any semblance of control. The night of the party arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror again, this time dressed in a suit that felt too tight, too formal. My heart pounded in my chest as I adjusted the tie around my neck, trying to ignore the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, but also the moment I had been waiting for. I was going to face them, both of them, and I was going to come out of this stronger. When I arrived at the gallery, the room was already buzzing with conversation. People milled about, admiring the paintings on the walls, glasses of champagne in hand. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in, murmurs of admiration and curiosity following me like a shadow. I forced a smile, nodding politely to the guests as I made my way through the crowd. But all I could think about was finding David and Rachel. I didn't have to look far. They were standing near one of my larger pieces, talking quietly, their heads close together. Rachel looked beautiful, as always, her long hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. But seeing her next to David made something twist painfully in my chest. He was smiling at her, that same charming, confident smile that had disarmed me when we'd first met. The smile that now made me want to punch him in the face. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening as I approached them. The noise of the room seemed to fade away, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. They hadn't noticed me yet, too wrapped up in their own conversation. I stopped a few feet away, just watching them, trying to keep my anger in check. Finally, Rachel looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened slightly, and she straightened, stepping away from David. "Liam," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. David turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Liam," he greeted me, as if nothing had happened between us, as if we were still on good terms. I wanted to laugh, I wanted to scream, but instead I just stood there, my body tense with barely contained rage. "Enjoying the party?" I asked, my voice tight. David nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's a great turnout. You should be proud." Proud. That word felt like a slap in the face. How could I be proud when everything about this night felt like a lie? But I wasn't going to let them see how much this was affecting me. Not yet. "I am," I said, forcing a smile. "But I couldn't have done it without your help, could I?" There was a beat of silence, and I could see the flicker of surprise in David's eyes. He knew what I was doing. He knew I was baiting him, pushing him to acknowledge the truth. But he didn't take the bait. Instead, he smiled that infuriatingly calm smile and said, "I'm glad I could support your work. It's been an honor." I felt the rage bubbling up inside me again, threatening to spill over. But I couldn't lose control. Not here, not now. I glanced at Rachel, who was standing there, looking uncomfortable, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Well, I hope you're both enjoying the night," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "It must be nice to see everything come together after all the hard work you've both put in." Rachel flinched at my words, but David's expression remained unchanged. He wasn't going to give me the satisfaction of a reaction. Fine. If he wanted to play it cool, I could play that game too. "I'll see you both later," I said, turning on my heel and walking away before I could say something I'd regret. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands shaking as I made my way through the crowd. I needed air. I needed to get out of there before I did something stupid. I pushed through the door to the gallery's terrace, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I leaned against the railing, trying to calm my racing heart, my mind still spinning from the confrontation. What was I doing? What was my plan here? I had come to the party determined to confront them, to make them pay for what they'd done. But now that I was here, I felt lost. Adrift. The door to the terrace opened behind me, and I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. I could feel Rachel's presence before she even spoke. "Liam," she said quietly, stepping up beside me, "can we talk?" I didn't answer her right away. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, and I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I nodded. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for everything." I closed my eyes, the words stinging like salt in an open wound. Sorry. She was sorry. But what did that even mean? What was she sorry for? For the affair? For lying? For breaking me? "I didn't want this to happen," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "But you did, Rachel. You did." She flinched at my words, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know I did, and I'll never forgive myself." I stood there, staring out at the city lights, Rachel's words barely registering. Sorry. The word was hollow now, an empty echo of what it used to mean. I had heard it too many times, in too many ways, and it didn't make anything better. It didn't fix the nights she spent with David. It didn't undo the betrayal that had torn my life apart. But still, she stood next to me, waiting for me to say something, to respond, to acknowledge the apology that was hanging in the air between us like a fragile thread. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. "Why?" The words slipped out before I could stop it, quiet and raw. I turned to face her, searching her face for something, an answer, an explanation, a reason that would make any of this make sense. "Why him, Rachel?" She bit her lip, her eyes dropping to the ground. She looked ashamed, but I didn't know if it was for my benefit or if she actually felt it. "I don't know," she whispered. "I wish I could give you a simple answer, but I can't." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "You can't just say, 'I don't know.' You owe me more than that." Rachel wiped at her eyes, tears starting to slip down her cheeks. I didn't plan for this to happen, Liam. I swear I didn't. It happened. We were spending time together because of your work, and then one thing led to another, and her voice trailed off as if she couldn't bear to finish the sentence. Do you love him? I asked, my stomach knotting as I waited for her answer. She didn't speak for a long time, and the silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear the faint hum of traffic below, the distant murmur of voices from inside the gallery. And still, she said nothing. Do you? I pressed, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. Rachel finally looked up at me, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know how I feel anymore. Everything is so messed up, and I'm confused. And that's not an answer, Rachel. I snapped, cutting her off. You either love him or you don't. You don't get to sit there and play both sides. She flinched at my words, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the situation was finally crushing her. I love you, Liam, she said softly. I never stopped loving you, but I don't know if that's enough anymore. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The one thing I had held on to, the one sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this, was shattered. Not enough? I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. How could you say that after everything? I don't know what to say, she whispered. I'm lost too. I made mistakes, huge mistakes, and I don't know how to fix any of this. I clenched my fists, the anger and pain swirling inside me, threatening to spill over. You fix it by choosing, I said, my voice low. You fix it by deciding whether you want to be with me or him. It's that simple. Rachel shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. It's not that simple. I stared at her, feeling like I didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of me anymore. This was the person I had built a life with, the person I had trusted, and now she was telling me she didn't know if she still wanted me. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. You're right, I said bitterly. It's not simple, because you made it complicated. You made this mess, Rachel, not me. I know, she choked out. I know I did, and I'm sorry. There it was again. That word that meant nothing anymore. I turned away from her, gripping the cold railing tightly as I tried to steady myself. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I can't do this, I muttered, more to myself than to her. Liam, her voice was so soft, so fragile, like she was afraid of what I might say next. I need time, I said, still not looking at her. I can't make any decisions right now. I don't even know what I want anymore. Rachel didn't respond. She just stood there, her quiet sobs the only sound filling the silence between us. I could feel the weight of her presence, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around, to comfort her, to do anything that might give her hope. I was too broken, too angry, too lost in my own pain to even think about what came next. After what felt like an eternity, I heard her footsteps retreating, the soft click of the door as she left the terrace and went back inside. I was alone again, but this time, the loneliness felt crushing. The cold air stung my skin, but I barely noticed it. All I could think about was the emptiness that was spreading through me, like a void I couldn't fill. I don't know how long I stood there, staring out at the city without really seeing it. The lights blurred together, the noise of the party fading into the background as my thoughts spiraled. Everything felt so surreal, like I was trapped in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When I finally pulled myself away from the railing, the terrace was empty, the door to the gallery slightly ajar. I didn't want to go back in. I didn't want to face anyone, least of all David. But I knew I couldn't hide out here forever. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped back inside. The noise of the party hit me like a wave. Laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses. It all felt so out of place compared to the storm raging inside me. I didn't see Rachel, and for that, I was grateful. I wasn't ready to face her again. Instead, I scanned the room for David. I knew I wasn't done with him yet. It didn't take long to find him. He was standing near the bar, talking to a group of people, looking as calm and collected as ever. My blood boiled at the sight of him, standing there like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been the one to help tear my life apart. I made my way over to him, my steps slow but deliberate. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I needed to confront him again. I couldn't let him walk away from this unscathed. He noticed me before I reached him, his eyes locking onto mine with that same unreadable expression. He excused himself from the conversation and turned to face me, his posture relaxed, like he wasn't worried about what was coming next. "Liam," he greeted me, his voice smooth and even. I was hoping we could talk. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to knock that smug look off his face. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about." David raised an eyebrow, his expression calm, almost patronizing. "I disagree. I think we have a lot to discuss." "What could you possibly have to say?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "You've already said enough." David didn't flinch. "I understand that you're angry, and you have every right to be. But this doesn't have to be the end of everything, Liam. Your career, your art, it's bigger than what's happened between us. Don't let your personal feelings destroy what you've worked so hard for." His words felt like acid in my ears. "You think this is about my career?" I asked, incredulous. "This is about my life, David. You've wrecked my life." "I never intended to hurt you," he said, his tone so calm it made my skin crawl. "I admire you, Liam. Your talent, your vision. I wanted to support that. By screwing my wife?" I shot back, my voice rising. David didn't blink. "That wasn't part of the plan, but Rachel, she came to me, Liam. She was lonely. She needed someone, and I don't want to hear it," I snapped, cutting him off. "I don't care what excuses you have. You crossed a line, David." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I get that you're upset, but think about what you're saying. You're going to throw everything away because of this? You're better than that." "Am I?" I asked, taking a step closer to him, "because right now, I don't feel like I am." David held my gaze, his eyes steady, unflinching. "This doesn't have to be the end, Liam. We can find a way forward. I still believe in you." I stared at him, my mind reeling. The nerve of this man. He had the audacity to stand there and act like he was still on my side, like he hadn't ripped my life apart piece by piece. And yet, there was a part of me, a small, twisted part, that wondered if he was right. Was I really going to throw away everything I had built because of what had happened? I stared at David, the weight of his words pressing down on me. He stood there, calm and composed, as if the chaos he'd created meant nothing to him. He was offering me a way out, a way to move past everything without destroying my career, without losing everything I'd worked for. But at what cost? Could I really stand there and let him pretend like nothing had happened? Like this was just some obstacle I had to overcome, something to shrug off and forget? I clenched my fists, my knuckles turning white as I tried to keep my anger in check. "You think I can just move on from this?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "You think I can just pretend that what you did doesn't matter?" David didn't flinch. He held my gaze, his expression steady. "I'm not asking you to forget, Liam. I'm asking you to think about your future. What happens between you and Rachel, that's for you two to figure out. But your art, your career, that's separate. You don't have to lose everything because of this." I felt my chest tighten, the rage and confusion twisting inside me. He was making it sound so simple, as if all I had to do was compartmentalize, to put everything in neat little boxes and move on. But how could I do that? How could I separate my work from the betrayal? Every painting, every brushstroke felt tainted now, stained by what had happened. And yet, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe he was right. Maybe I could salvage something from this wreckage. Maybe I didn't have to lose everything. But at what cost? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "I can't do this," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "I can't just pretend like it's all fine." David took a step closer, his voice softening. "I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to think about what really matters to you. You're a talented artist, Liam. Don't throw that away." I wanted to scream, to lash out at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But instead I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. I had worked so hard to get here, to build a career that mattered. I had sacrificed so much for my art, my time, my energy, my relationships. And now, standing on the edge of losing it all, I didn't know if I had the strength to walk away. "You don't get it," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't get what you've taken from me." David sighed, his expression softening. "I do, Liam, more than you think. But you have a choice here. You can let this destroy you, or you can use it. Use the pain, the anger, the betrayal, Channel it into your work. That's what great artists do." His words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I hated how much they made sense. Wasn't that what art was supposed to be? A reflection of our deepest emotions, our darkest struggles? But the thought of painting through this, of turning my pain into something beautiful, felt like a betrayal in itself. I didn't want to immortalize what had happened. I wanted to forget it, to erase it from my life. I looked away from him, my thoughts swirling. "I don't know if I can," I said quietly. David didn't push. He simply nodded, his voice calm. "Take your time, but just remember, your art is yours. No one can take that from you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. I turned on my heel and walked away, the noise of the gallery fading into the background as I made my way outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I welcomed the sting of it, letting it pull me back into reality. I needed space. I needed distance. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. As I walked through the dark streets, my mind raced. What was my next move? Could I really separate my career from the mess my life had become? Could I keep working, keep painting, knowing that everything was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal? And what about Rachel? What about the marriage we had built, the life we had shared? Was there anything left to save? I didn't have the answers. Not yet. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this, caught between anger and grief, between love and hate. Something had to give. By the time I made it back to the apartment, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me drained and exhausted. I hesitated at the door, my hand resting on the handle, unsure if I was ready to face whatever waited for me on the other side. But I couldn't avoid it forever. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the city outside. Rachel was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her, staring blankly at the floor. She didn't look up when I entered, and for a moment, I wondered if she even knew I was there. I took a deep breath and walked over to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Rachel?" I said softly. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Liam," she whispered, her voice raw. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us heavy with everything we weren't saying. I didn't know where to start, didn't know how to untangle the mess we had found ourselves in. But I knew we couldn't keep going like this, tiptoeing around the truth, avoiding the inevitable. "I talked to David," I said finally, my voice strained. Rachel flinched at his name, her hands twisting in her lap. "What did he say?" I sighed, sinking into the chair across from her. He said he never meant to hurt me, that it just happened, the same thing you said." She nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor again. "It's the truth." "I know," I said, my voice softening, "but that doesn't make it any easier." Rachel let out a shaky breath, wiping at her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this, Liam. I don't know if I can." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees as I stared at the ground. "Do you even want to?" She didn't answer right away, and the silence felt like a knife twisting in my chest. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know. I don't know what I want anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had been holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. But hearing her say those words, hearing her admit that she didn't know if she wanted to fix things, it shattered what little hope I had left. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "I can't do this, Rachel. I can't keep waiting for you to figure out if you still love me." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I do love you, Liam. I always have." "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one fighting for this?" I asked, my voice breaking. She didn't have an answer. She just sat there, staring at me, her tears falling silently down her cheeks. And in that moment, I realized that maybe there was nothing left to fight for. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. "I think we need some time apart," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's eyes widened in shock, and she shook her head. "No, Liam, please, don't do this." "I don't know what else to do," I said, my heart aching. "I need space, we both do." She stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of me, her hands reaching out to touch my arms. "Please, Liam, don't leave. We can fix this. We can try." I shook my head, pulling away from her. "I don't know if we can, Rachel. I don't know if I can." Her face crumpled, and she sobbed, the sound ripping through me like a blade. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that we could somehow go back to the way things were. "I'm sorry," I whispered, turning away from her and walking toward the door. "I need time." I heard her sobs behind me as I left the apartment, the sound echoing in my ears long after I had closed the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going or how long I would be gone, but I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again.